Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. What is the one thing that a lot of successful go-getters have in common? It's their capacity to get things done. So how are some of the best and brightest also the most productive? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Organisational psychologist Dr Amantha Imber has spoken to hundreds of high-flying entrepreneurs, business owners, academics and entertainers on her podcast, How I Work. She's now turned those interviews into a book called Timewise. In it, she outlines some of the out-of-the-box thinking on goal setting, daily routines and decision-making. The podcast has been a phenomenal success with more than 3 million downloads in 4 years. Chris Ashmore asks Amantha why she started it and what it's about.
I had this hypothesis that there were all these super successful people in the world who had risen to the top of their fields, whether they be CEOs, entrepreneurs, artists, actors, you name it. And yet we've all got the same amount of hours in the day. And I thought, surely they must be using their time differently to the rest of us mere mortals. So I wanted to understand, did they have different rituals or habits or strategies that they use to get so much out of their day? And it turns out that they do, and that's what the show's about.
Now, your latest book, Timewise, I understand many of the lessons from the podcast you've written about in that book. What did you attempt to explore with that book?
With a podcast, because I've been doing it now for 4 years, and so I've done several hundred interviews now, and if someone wanted some quick advice from some of my guests to learn how to use their time more wisely, that's potentially hundreds of hours of listening to extract some of the great tips I've learned. And so I thought, wouldn't it be quite sensible and time efficient to take what I think are some of the most impactful tips that I've heard and put them in a book that people can devour probably in 2 or 3 hours and also use as a reference guide to come back to when they want to experiment with a new strategy.
Well, if we can look at some of those tips, and there's many to choose from, but one of them's on goal setting, and there's a gentleman there that you referred to, Dr Alter, about how he says we have it all wrong when it comes to goal setting.
So let's just say, we have a goal to lose 10 kilos. We set that goal and then we work towards that goal. But until we hit that 10 kilo point on the scales, we are failing. And it's like that with any goal. Like Dr Alter, the professor that gave me the tip, he uses the example of writing a book. So he's written a couple of New York Times best-selling books. And, when you start to write a book, you have a goal of, I'm going to write 100,000 words on this topic by this point in time. But until you've written those words, you are failing, which is very demotivating. And of course, when we hit the goal, what do? We maybe celebrate for a few moments and then we move on and we set the next goal and we put ourselves back in a state of failure. So what Adam suggests and what he does in his own life to maintain motivation for the thing that he's working on is to set a system instead of setting goals. So sure, you're clear on your end point, it's like to write a 100,000 word book or to lose 10 kilos, but he thinks about what is the daily system or a weekly system, that if he does that regularly, then it will get him to that end point. So for example, with writing a book, Adam had a system of writing 1,000 words a day. And if you do that for 100 days, you're going to have a 100,000 word book. So you can feel good because on a daily basis, you're doing the system and you're getting to achieve the end result of that system. And so you're maintaining motivation throughout.
Now, another focus of the book is efficiency. Any tips you'd like to share on that?
One tip that I learned that has just stuck with me, and I do think about it quite a lot, is how your computer mouse can make you more or less efficient. So this tip came from Rahul Vohra, who's the founder of my favourite email software called Superhuman. Highly recommended. It makes doing email far quicker. But something that he thinks about, so he's a programmer, and if you're a computer-based worker, as I'm sure a lot of listeners are, if you can reduce the amount of time that you're using your mouse, you'll actually work quite a bit faster. So whenever we use our mouse to do tasks, it's slower than if we're just using the keyboard. So something Rahul spends a lot of time doing is learning the keyboard shortcuts, like the main keyboard shortcuts to any software program he's using or new software programs that he's learning. So obviously a lot of these keyboard shortcuts, like, things like Command or Control C, Command or Control V, like these are, sort of normal copy, paste and so forth. And they go across all software, but then there'll also be shortcuts that are unique to certain software. So my advice there is spend some time getting familiar with keyboard shortcuts, and you will actually make yourself far more efficient when you're doing computer-based work.
Terrific. Now, you recommend a to-don't list as opposed to a to-do list. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, I do love standard to-do lists, and certainly there are quite a few chapters in the book about how to get more out of to-do lists. But the to-don't list idea came from Rachel Botsman, who is a world-renowned expert on trust and technology. And she found herself reflecting a lot when the pandemic hit, because she was someone that used to travel a lot for work, giving keynote speeches to various organisations in various countries. And prior to the pandemic, she would often reflect on what the things that were sort of, sucking her energy and the things that she didn't want to do. And she would occasionally reflect on that. But when the pandemic hit, she started a monthly ritual where every month she would sit down and she would reflect on the month that had just been. And she would ask herself, what were the things that I found sort of quite de-energising and deflating, and essentially the things that I don't want to do. And she would put that on her to-don't list. Because fundamentally, so many of our lives are about adding and adding and adding and doing more and more and more. But time is finite. We can't always keep adding. So for Rachel, she thinks deliberately about what can she subtract or take away from her life to boost her own happiness and impactfulness.
It takes time and effort and energy to make decisions all the time too, doesn't it? If you already have an idea of what yes is and what no is, you don't have to keep thinking about whether you should be doing something or not.
Yes, this is absolutely true. Like if you write something on your to-don't list, like for me, something on my to-don't list, I do a lot of keynote speaking, and I often get asked to do dinner presentations, and I have done some in the past, and they've been terrible because nobody wants to learn during dinner. They just want to drink and talk. And I don't want to do a keynote speech if I'm not having an impact. And so one of the things on my to-don't list is that I don't do dinner keynotes. I knock every single one back.
Good idea. Now, before we go, we're moving into the new year, and as listeners are throwing off the shackles from 2022 and looking forward, perhaps, to a new year, 2023, do you have any tips on how to prepare for a new year?
I think an interesting exercise to go through as you're heading into the new year, which is a good time to reset habits and rituals and things like that, is to take a typical month in your calendar from this year, or maybe even a fortnight. And it might be the fortnight that's just gone, fortnight that's coming up, and have a look at how you're actually using your time, because our calendar shows us that. And ask yourself, does how you're using your time right now reflect your values and your goals? Because for a lot of people, it simply doesn't. And I think it's a really good goal to have in the new year to go, I am going to design my work life and my non-work life in a way where I'm spending time and energy that matches the things that are important to me.
That was Amantha Imber, founder and chief maker at Inventium and author of Timewise. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.